topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Churchill said, "Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it." Kevin Hallinan believes that certainly applies to business. Welcome to Winning Business Radio, here at W4CY Radio. That's W4CY.com. And now, your host, Kevin Hallinan.
Thanks, everyone, for joining in again today. I'm Kevin Hallinan, and welcome back to Winning Business TV and Radio on W4CY.com. We're streaming live on Talk4TV.com, in addition to Facebook at Winning Business Radio, as well as available in podcast after the live show on many other platforms. You hear them every week. It's YouTube, it's iHeartRadio, it's Spotify, it's Apple. It's pretty much wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. The mission of Winning Business Radio and TV, as regular viewers and listeners know, is to offer insights and advice to help people avoid the mistakes of others, to learn best practices, the how-tos, the what-tos, the what-not-tos, to be challenged and certainly to be inspired by the successes of others. But, virtually every successful person I've ever had a chance to talk to has had some form of failure in their lives and careers. So as I say every week, while we all have to get our knees skinned once in a while, I'm driven to keep those scrapes from needing major surgery. Let's endeavor to learn from history so we don't repeat it. Today, my guest is Steve Stroum, founder and president of Venmark International and author of Success and Self-Discovery, a business memoir with insightful tips and personal development advice that will help any entrepreneur. Here's Steve's bio. Stephen M. Stroum is a seasoned publicist, marketer, and entrepreneur who's been featured in Inc. magazine, Sales and Marketing Management magazine, Marketing magazine, Industrial Marketing, Omni magazine, Business Week Exchange, USA Today, the Christian Science Monitor, Boston Globe, Boston Herald. It's a little bit of a list. The Middlesex News, San Francisco Chronicle, WHDH TV, WJAR TV, WKOX TV, and other media outlets. He's also appeared on numerous radio and television programs, addressed many business and civic groups, has been a guest lecturer at the American Marketing Association, Boston College, Babson College, MIT, and his alma mater, Northeastern University, and numerous business and civic groups. Steve grew up in a working-class family in Auburndale, a village of Newton, Massachusetts. After briefly attending Northeastern University in 1966, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and served in Thailand during the Vietnam War. In March of 68, he received a medical discharge, became a disabled veteran, and in September returned to Northeastern University. He's the youngest of three boys. He was married to Peggy Lawrence in 1970 and received a BS in business administration in 73. Steve started his business from a spare room at his parents' home in Newton, Mass, with only $300 and after a few short months, moved to nearby Wellesley. By the end of his first year in business, he had 10 full-time employees and hundreds of clients. In recognition of his company's contribution to the success and growth of numerous small companies, Steve was selected to serve on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Small Business Task Force, was later appointed one of 18 small business advisors by the governor of Massachusetts. Steve was also selected by the International Rotary Foundation to tour South Korea for 6 weeks as an ambassador. He was later appointed to the Norbert Weiner Forum at Tufts University to study the impact of technology on society and served as publicity advisor on the Smaller Business Association of New England Board of Directors. That's SBANE. Steve and his wife, Peggy, have a son, Mark, and two grandkids, Avery and Ben. They have a mini double doodle. Steve will tell us about that. And they reside in Framingham. Steve, welcome to Winning Business TV and Radio. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you, Kevin. I appreciate that. I appreciate that lengthy introduction.
No problem. I have a reason for that. I wanted to include a lot because that'll allow us to go a lot of different directions in the conversation. But first, you got to tell us about the mini double doodle.
Fascinating breed. Her name is Brandy. Cute little pup. Her mother was half Labradoodle, half Golden Doodle, and the father's a miniature poodle. So she's about 23 pounds, 3.5 years old. It's a terrific dog, and we love her.
Nice.
He's like a member of the family.
Oh, for sure.
Do you have a dog?
We do. We do.
Yeah,
We have
there
a,
you
a
go. So
mini
you know what
mini
it's about.
schnauzer. Oh yeah, totally, totally.
Exactly.
She's almost 17 too, our dog.
Oh man,
So tell us about your wife, Peggy. She's put up with you for many years.
54 years of
54.
marriage
Yep.
coming up. So she's terrific. She actually she used to work for the chief of staff of Mount Zion Hospital out in San Francisco. So
Hmm.
she's very talented, and she was my first assistant at work, and made it all happen with me way back in the old days.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, we've had a blast. And every time, frankly, every time I've run into a problem, she's much better at selecting people than I am. Every time I ran into a problem, I'd call her into the office and should hire somebody. So she did a great job. She hired my first assistant after her, and then I think, geez, 4 or 5 years later, another one. And so in my 40 some odd years of business, I only had three assistants. So the last one was 26 years.
Wow,
That was a really good hire. So
that's a good track record for sure.
yeah. So
Tell us about Mark.
Mark is going to be 45 in February. He's
Hmm.
chief, what's his exact title? Chief Gifts Officer at Bentley College, Bentley
Oh, cool. Yeah.
University, and graduated from Roger Williams University years ago.
Hmm.
Doesn't live too far away, which is a good thing, and has a granddaughter, his daughter Avery, and a son Benjamin.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
we have a
awesome.
tight relationship. He and I go down to we go fishing frequently. We go down to the Keys every year, and just the two of us get away for long weekend fishing. And um, as I mentioned, I wrote in the book. He worked for me for a while back in 2008, and we had an agreement that if he didn't like it after a year, then no hard feelings, and we would move on. So it was a great experience. We had a blast.
That's good.
But yeah, he's a great guy.
So I'm in Rosendale, so I know Auburndale fairly well. Tell the audience, the viewers and the listeners about Auburndale and what it was like to grow up there.
Well, growing up there was interesting because give really my when I grew up there, the Mass Turnpike ended in Weston. So our house that I grew up in on Robin Hood Street in Auburndale was taken by the Mass Turnpike.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, but that was back in 1960.
Hmm.
But Newton was a great town to grow up in. In fact, that's where I ended up starting the business. My
Yeah.
folks moved from Auburndale to Newtonville. Um, I went to Newton North High, and it was a
Hmm.
great experience. You know, nice town. But again, that was back in the 50s and 60s. So
Yeah.
a lot of things
Yeah.
have changed.
Everything has.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, what were your early interests? A question I ask every interview. What were your early interests?
Good question. Sports. We're very
Hmm.
active in sports in the
Hmm.
neighborhood. And I always wanted to be in business for myself. I had a paper route when I was,
Yeah.
kids today don't even know what a paper route is, but I
I had one.
delivered newspapers back in the early days. And, I had a job at 14 as soon as I could get a license to work,
Mm, mm,
so always active with that sort of thing. And, cut grass around the neighborhood, shovel driveways. I remember when it would snow, we'd go out
mhm.
and hustle and try to shovel driveways, shovel walks, make some money.
Same.
And yeah, you did the same, I presume.
Yes, my, paper route, though, was when I was, like, 23.
Oh,
From an
okay.
automobile, whipping them out the window.
Oh no, we were in our. I was on my bicycle, and they were up. They were on the front carriage,
Yeah.
and then would whip them. And that was back when the Newton Waltham News Tribune sold for a nickel. But great memories. Great
That's
memories.
good. I love it.
It's funny. I learned a lot about people back in those days. I delivered papers in the wealthy part of town, and then in
Mhm.
in in the black section, which in those days was called the colored village. And I got
Wow.
bigger
Wow.
tips. I got bigger tips in the village than I got up on the hill. So it was
Wow.
fascinating that working folks took care of working folks.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So, you started at Northeastern studying to become a teacher before the Air Force in Vietnam. But then you chose to enlist. Tell us about that story.
Well, what happened? I majored in education to begin with,
Right.
and over the summer of '66, took a couple of business courses and transferred into business.
Mhm.
But I, after a few months in college, this was 1966, right in the middle of the Vietnam War, was at its
Mm.
height, and it was one of these youthful decisions. I decided to quit Northeastern, and I
Your
was in
dad,
good
your dad
standing.
loved the idea, right? I understand.
Oh man, my brother was in the Air Force at the time.
Yeah.
I went to my father. It was the low point of my life, and I said, "Dad, I've quit college and enlisted in the Air Force." And he looked at me and said, "You're stupid, just like your brothers,
Oh
and
man.
and you're a quitter."
Mm.
And
Wow.
I swore it after that nobody would ever call me stupid, and B, I would never quit anything. And as far as I know, the second aspect of that is true. I don't know about the first, but yeah, it turned out to be a terrific motivator. Of course, I was upset with him for a while, but
Mm.
I couldn't blame him because it was a youthful decision. I knew I'd screwed up. I knew I'd made the mistake. My classmates were throwing me a party. Everybody was happy. It was, go, 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 Steve.
Mm. Mm.
But like I said, it was the height of the Vietnam War. I enlisted on a Tuesday and was drafted the following Friday.
Wow.
So yeah, they had student deferments in those days, and as soon as you lost it, the military was all over you. So, and then I went in for basic training in February of '67, and ended up in August of '67 going over to Thailand after tech school.
All right,
So,
we're gonna take a break, but before we do, there's a really interesting story about how you made it to Thailand instead of in frontline action, potentially frontline action in
oh,
Vietnam.
absolutely. I was the only one in my tech school that got an assignment over in Thailand
Mm.
because I took the initiative to ask for it. I befriended the sergeant. I found out who the sergeant was
Hmm.
who was responsible for making the assignments. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, listen, my brother's stationed in Thailand. If you have any assignments coming up in Thailand, I'd love to have the opportunity to get a shot at it." And sure enough, there was one. Everybody else in my group, everybody else in the flight went to Pensacola, Florida for jungle training for
Hmm.
Vietnam.
Hmm.
I went to Thailand. And believe me,
Wow.
it was not a bad experience other than coming down with a skin problem.
We will get to that. We will get to that. All right, we're going to be right back, everybody. Just about 1 minute, Steve, and audience. We'll be back with Steve Strum.
You're listening to Winning Business Radio with Kevin Hallinan on W4CY Radio. That's W4CY.com. Don't go away. More helpful information is coming right up, right here on Winning Business Radio.
Have you ever dreamt of being on the radio? Well, now is your chance. Be a radio show guest on the #1 ranked internet radio station and promote you and your business for free. Yes, you heard it, free. Business advertising right here on W4CY.com. Call 561-506-4031 now to get booked on one of our shows. That's 561-506-4031. Get your free advertising now.
And now back to Winning Business Radio with Kevin Hallinan, presenting exciting topics and expert guests with one goal in mind, to help you succeed in business. Here once again is Kevin Hallinan.
We're back with Steve Strum, founder and president of Venmark International. He'll tell us about that in a little bit, and author of Success and Self-Discovery, a business memoir with insightful tips and personal development advice that will help any entrepreneur. So tell us about your role in the Air Force in Thailand. It was munitions, as I understand it.
Right.
And pick any story from that experience and share it.
Well, the moral of the story really, with respect to tech school as well, where I went to become a munitions specialist, was that you have to ask for something if you want it, and you have to be assertive.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in Thailand, I was stationed in Thailand, and we were working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, everybody on the base, and 12, full 12-hour days. And we worked, there were several crews in the bomb dump, in the munitions storage area. It was called a bomb dump. We had a build-up crew, a storage crew, load crew, all these various crews. And at the end of the day, we flew 39 missions a day over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, day in and day out.
Mm.
So I had the opportunity to become a munitions controller. And if you envision a spreadsheet, but in those days, it was several grease pencil, glassine pages of plastic plexiglass with grease pencil.
Mhm.
And I had to, as a munitions controller, I had to, keep an eye on, monitor every single function from when munitions came in, we stored them, then they got built, they got delivered to the flight line, and then signed off and so forth. And so there were four of us. So again, took the initiative to ask the sergeant in charge. I said, Sarge, do you care how the munition storage area is monitored? In other words, you just want somebody here 24 hours a day. You don't care what the hours are, do you? And he said, no, whatever you suggest. I said, well, we'd like to work 12 hours on, 24 hours off. He said, that's fine. So we did. We were the only ones on the base. We go to work at 7 in the morning. And when I say go to work, the Air Force is very much like the civilian. I mean, I had a military driver's license. I'd pick the guys up in a truck, would go into work. At the end of the day, I'd take them home. And we weren't marching around or doing anything of that nature. We'd go to our jobs. So it worked out beautifully. You go to work at 7 in the morning, get off at 7 at night. You wouldn't go to work again until 7 the next night. Made time go by beautiful. And we were special. Always liked being special.
Well, I read one section where I don't know if it was a sergeant or whatever. Somebody said, "You're a Jew, right?" And you said, "Yep." And he said, "Well, how come you're not an officer?" What was the answer?
I didn't know if you wanted me to get into that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just looked at. He said, "Stroum, you're Jew, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "How come you're not an officer?" And I looked at him. I said, "Sarge, because I screwed up just like you."
Enlisted.
Yeah, and that was an interesting experience. So.
Yeah. So no, I was just reading my notes here. So you did. How long were you in the Air Force? Because you had a medical discharge. You were there for how long?
Yeah, I was in actually for about 14 months.
Okay.
I got a
Very
medical
difficult skin condition, which resulted in a medical discharge. Took him a while, my understanding is, to even diagnose it correctly, which
Yeah,
eventually gave you, what, a 30% disability or so?
well, again, being assertive and
Yeah.
salesman, I got out of the Air Force with a 10% disability.
10%. Okay.
Yeah. Well, just backing
Yeah.
up a
No.
second. When I was
Yep.
in the hospital, I got air evacuated out of my base in Thailand to another
Mhm.
base in Thailand. They couldn't do anything for me. They sent me to a base in the Philippines. Couldn't do anything for me. In the meantime, all I had was a gym bag, and they sent me to another base at Tachikawa Air Force Base in Japan, where I was there for 2 weeks. They took a skin biopsy, determined that I had what they called lichen planus, some kind of a virus, skin virus.
Mm.
So they sent me back to Chelsea Naval Hospital, which is no longer in business.
Massachusetts for the out of state.
Massachusetts.
Yep.
Yep. And then from Massachusetts down to Andrews Air Force Base Hospital.
Mhm.
Now down there, they were treating me, taking photographs. I mean, I was a mess. And I used to have to take these coal tar baths every day. The guys in my ward were telling me I was going to fall in love with the street. But at any rate,
Wow.
the treatment was tough. So I heard from somebody that in the Air Force, if you couldn't serve in the war, you could be discharged. And they wanted to keep me, the doctors wanted to keep me and treat me for a year at Andrews Air Force Base. And I said, I don't want to waste a year of my life. First of all, I wanted to get back to college. I knew I made a mistake.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I said to the doctor, I said, listen, I'm a munitions specialist. There's no job for me here in the United States. I want to go back to the war. He said, well, we can't send you to the war. I said, well, in that case, I think I should get out of the Air Force. And literally put together a medical discharge. I carried it around with 5 doctors, got it signed, and March 25th, 1968, I received a 10% medical discharge. So somebody, again, taking initiative, somebody else said to me, geez, Steve, you ought to get in touch. I wanted to get a 20% disability because 20% would get you
School.
books,
Mhm.
tuition, expenses, the whole deal for 5 years at Northeastern. So one of the guys I bumped into said, why don't you get the Jewish war veterans to make a case for you? So I called them. I got in touch with them, hoping to get a 20% disability, and I got a 30% disability. So there you go. I went back to school, and in my third year of college, my wife and I got married. She had a job.
Nice.
I had co-op
Nice.
jobs. I had my books, tuition, expenses paid for. Books, tuition at Northeastern back then was a fortune. It was $395 a trimester.
Woo.
tough. $1,300 a year was tough.
I know.
Different time, Kevin.
So you're a little older than me, but UMass was 2,500.
Yeah, there you go.
And
So
yeah, my kids, yikes,
yeah, yeah. So
All right. So I love that. I love that assertiveness. And everyone needs to learn that lesson. You weren't probably a jerk about it. You were just speaking up for yourself, and they could have said no.
well, what people need to understand. There's a big difference between being assertive
Hmm.
and being aggressive.
Correct.
I was assertive. I asserted myself. Being
Mm,
aggressive is taking action against someone else,
mm.
and big difference. And in sales, obviously, we need to be assertive. You know.
So you have a bachelor's in business administration. What made you decide to go that direction? And that was actually, as you mentioned, a decision you made prior to the Air Force.
Yeah, I majored in education my first year of college,
Right.
and it didn't feel right. And I had a buddy of mine that was going up to Rensselaer Polytech, majoring in management, and we kibitzed about it and talked about it. And then I thought that would be a great idea. And I always loved behavioral science, but as I got into it more, I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. But I want to back up just one second
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
when I was in the hospital in the Air Force. When I left Northeastern, I was told I could return. I left in good academic
Oh,
standing.
I wanted you to. Yes. I'm sorry. I wanted you to tell the
No
story. Yeah.
worries, no worries. So I left in good academic standing, and so I'm in the hospital in the service, and you know, I'm in bed. I was really had to stay in bed because I was covered with this miserable coal tar, and every 3 weeks I took a coal tar bath and went out into a bar and had a couple of pops. But so I was really tied down. Fortunately, I wasn't hurt. I was
Hmm.
ambulatory, but
Hmm.
So at any rate, I wrote to the current dean of freshman at Northeastern reapplying, and I got declined. And I said, Jesus, this is ridiculous.
Now,
So
you had already been told when you left there'll be a spot for you when you return, right?
correct.
Yeah.
So I wrote, for that spot, and the dean wrote back and said the academic standards have changed since you left. You no longer qualify. So I called his office and requested an interview with him. And he granted me that interview. I went in to see him, Dean Kennedy, nice fella. And I look at him, and behind him is a credenza with 9 photographs of children. I said, after the chit chat and hello, and said, Dean, are those your children? He said, yes. I said, they're beautiful children. I said, I want to say something. He said, what's that? I said, I just spent the last, year and a half of my life and the last 5 months in 5 different hospitals protecting your beautiful children. I waved my hand in front of the pictures. And I saw his face, I read his face. And we went on talking and asked me why I wanted to go. I said I was assured that I could go back to school,
Mm.
and all I wanted was the opportunity. All I wanted was Northeastern University to keep their word, because I spent the last several months protecting your beautiful 9 children.
Love it.
And I saw in his eyes that I made my sale. So I said, listen, Dean, thank you very much for your consideration. I hope that I'll have a positive response. And a week later, I was accepted to Northeastern. And it was, again, you just can't accept
Mm.
no. You can't
Outstanding.
accept no. Yeah,
So you had a couple of noteworthy early jobs that, at least to me, they're noteworthy. Fireman's Fund, American Life Insurance. Okay, but to me, the interesting part, especially because of what I do for a living, you developed a national sales training program.
correct.
Tell me
Yeah.
about that. Tell us about that.
All right. Well, what happened was my wife and I moved to San Francisco in 1974.
Hmm.
And I had bumped into, um, before I left, my mother gave me the name of an employment agent. And so I went to see him, and long story short, got involved. He got me an interview with Fireman's Fund, American Life Insurance Company, wholly owned subsidiary of American Express. And I went and I got the job as life sales representative in Walnut Creek, California. I took over a territory that was 49th out of 50th in the company.
Ooh.
Inside of 3 months, I brought it up to 3rd place in the company, outproduced my predecessor's entire previous year. My boss called me into his office. So I figured, this is fantastic. I'm going to get maybe I'll get a raise. So I went in to see him, and he said to me, Steve, in life, some people need steak to be happy, and they need to eat steak to be happy. He said, around here, pork and beans are just fine.
Oh,
And I misquoted in the middle. He said, and other people are satisfied with pork and beans. He said, around here, pork and beans are just fine. So I left his office totally deflated. I mean, here I was, number
very
3.
proud of yourself.
Huh? Very
Proud
proud
of
of
yourself,
myself.
yeah.
Outproduced my predecessor's entire previous year in 3 months.
Mm.
And I go in for, hoping to get a stroke or two, and bang. So I was just beside myself. So for the next 4 weeks, I really didn't work. I mean, and I felt so guilty about it. I'd go to the marina, I'd make a couple of telephone calls in the morning. I went down to the Marina Green in San Francisco. I'd jog around and what have you. And I didn't do much. 4 weeks later, I'm in the home office. There was a meeting. The VP of charge of sales comes up to me and he puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, Steve, congratulations. I said, for what? He said, you're leading the company in sales. I said, I'm leading the company in sales. I haven't worked in 4 weeks. Shame on you. I'm 25 years old, 26
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So this was the VP in charge of brokerage. Obviously, Kevin, at this point, I didn't give a damn if I was fired.
Mm-hmm.
Called me into his office and said, what's going on? I told him. I said, I'd like to come into the home office and write your national sales training program. You people have no clue what you're doing. And he said, well, what if we don't do that? I said, well, then I'll go to work for Safeco. I'm sure they'd like to have my talents. Spoken like an entrepreneur, not a corporate guy. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
So at any rate, they brought me into the home office. I wrote the national sales training program. They thought it would take a year, but I've been obviously implementing it.
Mm-hmm.
Territory management, how to assess prospects, the pitch, everything. You're involved. So I wrote it and put it on in late mid-September 75. And I remember it well because as I was walking up to the rostrum, somebody had a TV on, and Johnny Bench was catching was Cincinnati versus Boston, the 1975 World Series, right?
Wow.
So I get on the rostrum and I'm giving my pitch and I'm explaining everything to everybody, and it was silence. I was just about booed off the rostrum, and I really learned a valuable lesson. I hadn't created any allies, and I didn't understand corporate politics, and I didn't like corporate politics. So from that point on, it was problematic. And ironically, that night or a couple of nights later, a friend of mine was coming up from Santa Clara up to San Francisco for dinner with us, and he had bumped into this fellow by the name of Mike Gerber. And Mike Gerber, I don't know if you're familiar with the book called
I am very.
Yeah,
very.
Mike was my partner and my mentor. Mike called me and told me about this company were starting in San Mateo called Newsmaker, and called me up. Long story short, I ended up partnering with them to found Newsmaker, to start Newsmaker. And Newsmaker was really the predecessor to Venmark International. And predecessor to Venmark International was Sales Development Associates, which I actually named when I was in California. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, hold that thought right there. We need another commercial right here. We'll be back, everybody, in 1 minute with Steve Stroum.
You're listening to Winning Business Radio with Kevin Hallinan on W4CY Radio. That's W4CY.com. Don't go away. More helpful information is coming right up, right here on Winning Business Radio.
The YP.com website is your local search engine. If you're looking for a good restaurant, it can help you find the right one nearby with ratings and reviews. Or if your car breaks down, you can use the YP app to find the closest repair shop. Or maybe you're just looking for something to do on a Friday night. Well, it has great local coupons for all sorts of things in your area. No matter what, when, or where, if you're looking for something, YP Local Search can help you find it. So go to YP.com or download the app to search local, find local, and save local.
And now back to Winning Business Radio with Kevin Hallinan, presenting exciting topics and expert guests with one goal in mind, to help you succeed in business. Here once again is Kevin Hallinan.
We are back with Steve Stroum, founder and president of Venmark International and author of Success and Self-Discovery. Let's talk about Venmark. Why did you decide to start the company?
Well, I was, I had worked like a dog with Newsmaker for 6 months. In fact, I was supposed to start in January of 76, and December of 75, I went to the office and started working. Mike Gerber said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm anxious to get started." He said, "We can't put you on the payroll till January." I said, "I'm not looking for any money. I want to get started." So I took over and created new forms, training program, all kinds of instruments to make it successful, and
Mhm.
broke my butt. And within a few months, it was starting to take off and fly. So they gave me a company car and a salary, and I signed an agreement to be a partner. I knew the agreement was bogus. I didn't have a lawyer look at it
Yeah.
because I didn't care. I wanted the experience. This is exactly the marketplace I wanted to be involved with. My task was to in the insurance business, you don't have to be um, an underwriter to sell insurance. You need to know how to sell the benefits of insurance.
Mhm.
But in the PR business, the salesman and the account executive has always been one and the same, and that's a very expensive proposition. So my job was to train salespeople and develop the sales training program, the whole bit, train salespeople how to sell publicity, the benefits of publicity, which are, editorial exposure. It gives you a chance to get broad exposure and look as big as a major corporation
Mhm.
and all
Mhm.
these things. People relate to it easiest when you talk about a book on a television program, for example. That's
Right.
publicity. That's free editorial exposure.
Mhm.
So today it's called content, but same thing. In part called content. So my job was to package up that creative service and sell it using the insurance model. And I did it very successfully. Our service sold for like $395. By the end of June, I had 70 some odd $1,000 in sales.
Mm.
I came home for the bicentennial in 1976 with my
Yeah.
wife. I
Tall
came
shift.
home. Yep, came home for a week. My wife was here for 2. I went back to California. Mike called me up, said, "Hey, meet me at the airport. We've got a gig in LA." So I went down to LA with him. And on the way back, he said, "Listen, we want you to start another company with us." I said, "Whoa, that wasn't our agreement." Now I was working from 6 in the morning until midnight, literally. I wasn't eating. I went to 157 pounds.
Wow.
Now, when I was in the 8th grade, I played football at 170. So that gives you a perspective. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I was just blown away. So that was a big punch in the gut because I loved Mike and Ace, our other partner, and I loved this whole aspect of building Newsmaker up. We had 10 full-time people by 6 months. So I had to sign a non-compete agreement in San Francisco, and at that time, I just wanted to figure out what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So I got a book entitled "Where Do I Go From Here with My Life" by Crystal and Bowles. It was an oversized paperback. Sat down in my kitchen, lit up a Parliament, smoked in those days, made some coffee, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes. Took about 6 weeks to put my life plan together. And part of it also had an exercise. My wife and I had promised each other we'd live in San Francisco for 2 years before we came home, just to make
Mhm.
sure, what we were doing. So anyway, long story short, we decided to move back home. And I was going to take some interviews for a sales management job. And the first interview, I took was in Boston at a company called American Career Planning Services. A fellow named Walt Cameron, terrific guy. He liked me a lot, but said, "Steve, you lack the experience." I said, "Walt, I've done it." At that time, the average annual income was like 10,000 a year. I was making 36 in a company car. I mean, that was hot stuff, you know. But he said, "Steve, I'm sorry." He said, I really need to get somebody with more experience. But he said, "What are you going to do? What do you think you're going to do?" I said, "Well, it's become clear to me a couple of things. Number one, I know what I can do because I've done it.
Mhm.
And secondly, I think I'm going to start my own business doing what I did in California." I said, "And if I do, may I call you?" He said, "Please." So he became my first accountant.
Nice.
Uh, it was great. I made the appointment. It was December 10th, 1976, about one in the afternoon at the Prudential Center. And I had a salesman by the name that I hired, straight commission, by the name of Len. So Len came with me, and I told my wife, who was my first assistant, I said, call me at 1:15. And she said, why? I said, I want you to pull me out of the meeting. I want to look busy. Anyway, call comes in at 1:15. I'm on the phone. No, you'll have to tell him. I'll have to get back at you. Anyway, this was all happening in front of Walter, and it was terrific. So I'm going through my presentation, and of course, you explain what publicity is, what publicity can do for them, look at their opportunities with them, and so forth. And he said to me, "Whoa!" He says, I'm not General Electric. I don't have all that kind of much money, and I've already spent a fortune." I said, "How much have you spent?" He said, "I've spent $40,000. I said, "Walt, you can't afford not to spend another $395 to see what we can do for you." Shut up. And he said, "Okay." So I learned another lesson there.
I heard it. I was hoping you'd bring it up. We teach it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. No, I didn't say a word. Whoever talks first loses.
Yeah.
So he said, "Okay, great." We fill out the order. He signs the order. He says, "What are your terms?" And that's where I learned a big lesson. I said, "Well, we get paid with our order." And he said, "Fully?" I said, "Yes. When you figure out how to repossess an idea, I'll gladly extend you credit." And he looked at me and I said, "I know that was a stupid thing to say, Walt. I apologize." So it was like I inserted my foot in my mouth. Walt recognized, and he was such a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, Len and I left the office with a check for $395. We hopped on the elevator, and I just boom! I hit the 38th floor. I just pushed the button because we had to use a restroom. And we were so excited. We hugged and went to the restroom, came out. I looked up and I saw a sign that said Associated Industries of Massachusetts. And,
Aim.
And it said Directory of Manufacturers for sale, $15.75. So we bought it. I bought the directory. We went back and started cold calling. And,
Love it.
in the first year, I think we did 160,000 in business back in those days.
Wow.
It took off like a rocket. I had 10 full-time people. And so the memoir, my book, obviously is, the interesting thing, it took off like a rocket ship. Here I was, 28 years old. I started the company with $300. I was 28, first year, second year netted six figures.
Mm-hmm.
And I was depressed. I got depressed. Now, usually you'd think, geez, the average annual income was 11,000, 10,700.
Yeah.
And I'm 29 years old, earning six figures, and I'm depressed. And a lot of the book deals with how I figured out why I was depressed rather than elated. So it's interesting. You can still, you can still perform. You can still be successful at something that's almost innate. So I had to determine why I was depressed, and that was a whole process. And
well, give us a thumbnail.
Well, I got a terrific therapist.
Mm-hmm.
First couple of weeks, I was in therapy 3 days a week. I had 12 full-time employees, so I was responsible for those 12 families. So I couldn't fall apart. So I was being sustained and held up by this terrific therapist down in Providence.
Outstanding.
And so then I ultimately, I was involved in therapy for a couple of years and figuring out what made me happy and what aspects of the company made me happy. And so that's a thumbnail of it. I went through a process. One of my chapters deals with going up to Gloucester, and I rented a room for the weekend at an inn. And I sat up in this big picture window overlooking the ocean. Back in the day, you could smoke cigars. I had a cigar, bottle of Merlot, a pad of paper, and a pen. And I really figured out that weekend that I built this company. I had 12 full-time people. By then, our sales were well over $500,000 a year. We were cooking. I was invited by the editor of Computer World to come see him. I flew out to Cleveland, met with editors. There was a lot of stuff going on, and great things happening. But I wasn't happy. By this time, So I had to figure out and recreate and transform the business to make me happy. And that's what I was able to do. I mean,
Wow.
now I can look back on it. And the book,
Mhm.
writing the book was transformative. It was something I put in my journal. When I was involved in therapy, I kept a journal, and I would put the day of the week. I'd put the date,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
time, and the time of day, because I wanted to know what my strong time of day was. When if I was depressed in the morning, depressed at night, what
Mm.
was just I wanted to control the variables. It's like any
Mhm.
other sales scenario. So I did that, and I figured out. Um, that I could transform the business. I was starting to say, so in my journal in 1983, I first made the note that I wanted to write this book. The working title was Blue
Mm.
Collar Entrepreneur,
I know. I love that. I was going to comment on that too. Go ahead.
because 99.9% of businesses are small businesses,
Mhm.
majority of which are started by folks like you, you and me, brought up
Mhm.
collar families. You open up a barbershop, you open up a sub shop, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
you know, and so that was the working title. But as I got into editing the book further, it occurred to me that that was too limited. And so, but at any rate, that was 40 years ago. So it took me 40 years. So it was a couple of years ago, at age 73, I said to myself, Steve, you need to write that book, and stop BSing yourself and get to it. And part of it was I was afraid. Are you good enough? Can you write a good enough book? And this, so I laid it out there. You sound as though you've read. I laid my life out, and the vulnerability of the book is
Yeah. Yeah.
what people are responding to.
Mm.
If you go to Amazon.com and you look at the reviews, everybody that's reviewed it has really commented on the vulnerability. So that's the part of entrepreneuring I wanted to discuss in the book. Everybody who's an entrepreneur says, "Rah rah rah! I became a multimillionaire. I'm great. Look at me." You know, I give some of the real stuff that happens, having to part ways with my own brother and all kinds of different stuff, who I
Mm.
never should have hired. But you get under the gun, and you want to hire somebody you think you can trust, as opposed to sitting there and creating a job description and doing a complete analysis and coming up with what you really need. You know, so despite a degree in management with honors, I
Mhm.
made probably every mistake every entrepreneur makes. Fortunately, I've been resilient enough to come around the corner. So
Yeah. I always say I'm proud of my mistakes because I learned a lot
abs-
from them. Right.
absolutely, absolutely. I was very fortunate in California to work with Mike Gerber,
Mhm.
and he was a brilliant, brilliant guy. I mean, he's written over 20 books,
Yeah.
bestsellers. But our partner was Ace Remus, a fellow, and Ace was a Buddhist, and he thought in terms of doing something and not judging it. Don't judge it. More people, geez, writing a book is so vast. Just start it. Write it one. He would say, "Don't think about it, Steve. Do it." I'd go into his office with an idea about the sales presentation. Don't think about it. Do it. Because in other words, don't be afraid to fail. Failure
Yeah.
is just another experience that you can
Mhm.
learn from.
Mhm.
And it's invaluable. In fact, I've made some of my best sales in life by saying to my prospect, listen, Kevin, I think you and I both know that we ought to be working together. But for some reason, you have chosen not to hire me. And I really would appreciate it if you'd be candid with me and tell me why. And they would tell me why. And then I would simply say, well, if I can repair that, Kevin, and provide you with the information you just told me about, would you hire me? And they said yes. And then I'd solve that problem and would hire me and move ahead. That's my when I was in the insurance business, briefly in Paul Revere Insurance
Mhm.
in Boston. I was calling on this fellow, Sam Paris, in Wellesley for months, about 9, 10 months. And I finally said to him, Sam, I come and I see you and you talk to me and you like me and we go back and forth and we kibitz, but you've never hired me. He said, what's it going to take to get your business? He told me. And then, man, I'll tell you what, the floodgates opened up. I even had a desk in that place.
Nice.
All the agents hired me. So that's what's so the book contains a lot of those tips too.
So I
Um,
want to pull out a couple things here, just in
yeah,
the short time we have left. Learning to win. Tell us about that.
Learning to win is really, there's not one thing in particular. There's a series of behaviors. Um, I learned to win with Dave Whitney. That was the first time. Dave was a classmate of mine at Northeastern.
Mm.
That's where I really learned how to win. And we were going to class. I met him in my sophomore year, and I was a struggling student. I worked hard. I got B's and C's. Dave was a straight A student. So one day we're sitting on the quad. Kids are throwing frisbees around. I said, Dave, you don't seem, with all due respect, I said, you don't seem that much smarter than me, but you're getting straight A's and I'm getting B's and C's.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and said, Steve, the fact of the matter is I am a lot smarter than you, and I'll tell you why. And he showed me his study process.
Mm.
And that word process is key, because that's really where I learned how to win. So Dave said, what I do is I get a syllabus from every professor. If they don't have one, I insist on one, or I get it verbally. I plan out my entire calendar for the trimester, for the 3 months. And while you're, studying and cramming, I'm just reviewing, because I've had this plan, this process. I said, great, thank you. I implemented this process, and for the next 4 years got straight A's.
Wow.
So I went from a BC student with a label of a struggling, student, to a straight A student, exceptional. So learning how to win was learning to respect the process. So when I built my company, I built a sales training program. I had a sales book. We had all this data, all this information. It made my salespeople comfortable. It gave them a roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, it was before GPS, man. If you couldn't read a map, you had problems.
Yeah.
So it gave them a roadmap to proceed and to move ahead. And I had them learn a sales presentation. And the rationale there was a sales process of explaining what you do, how it can benefit them, and knowing the difference between open-ended questions to gather information and closed-end questions to get affirmation. And unless somebody understands in the first 10 minutes what you're doing, and you continue without affirming that understanding, you're wasting your time. And what's worse, you're wasting your customer's time.
All right,
So,
last one. Optimizing, because I think this is a good tie-in here. Optimizing work-life balance.
Well, that's interesting.
I
was first very, very driven. And I majored in management in college, organizational behavior, and I knew that a quote balanced life was optimum. Okay, but my body and my being behaved differently, and I always really worked hard. And so I had this drive to succeed. And that drive bothered me so much. I went to a vocational psychologist at Berkeley when I was in California, because one Saturday I went to a bar. I figured, geez, I'll relax. I'll go to a bar, have a couple of beers, shoot pool. And geez, I couldn't relax. I couldn't enjoy I couldn't waste time like that in those days. So I had to find out, I was driven. And ultimately, once I started my own company, and fortunately, Peggy, my wife, understood I was driven, and she joined a health club, just spent her time getting it, because I wasn't around. I was working 7 days a week, and so what I learned was ultimately what my own work pattern was, and that I needed to take 4 to 6 weeks vacation a year, and we did that. My wife and I would take a vacation, just the two of us. We'd take 2 weeks. So that's 2 weeks. We'd take 2 weeks as a family. And then we would each take a separate week to, she'd go with her girlfriend. I'd go fishing in the Keys or whatever.
Yeah.
And every time I came back from a vacation, I'd work and I'd come home at 6 o'clock and, for a week. And then the next week I'd be coming home at 7. And, my normal time I'd come home at 8 or 8:30. Just, I was so into it. And about every 12 weeks, I took a vacation, because that's how I achieved the best balance and prevented burnout. And the other thing I did on vacation was I vacated. Nice. I never once called my office. Gone for 2 weeks, never once. I had a great assistant. She knew, and I respected her. If she needed me, she'd call me. So never once. So I really vacated. These people, these kids, especially today.
Laptops and cell phones, yep.
Forget about it. You're not vacating. You're not emptying it out the head and just relaxing. And I would go on vacation. I'd read 7 books.
I had a client say to me once, "Hey, responding to me while you're on vacation doesn't impress me."
Yeah, absolutely. That must have resonated, huh?
It did. It certainly did. It certainly did. Hey, we are out of time. I have 2 more questions. Who in the viewing and listening audiences should reach out to you and why?
Well, what they should do
Yep.
is purchase my book.
Read the book. It's available on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon. It's entitled Success and Self-Discovery, and it's my business memoir. And there's a lot of tips in there. And I have a website for that book, which is smstroum, STROUM.com. But again, it's available on Amazon. You can go to Amazon and you can read the introduction, the first couple of chapters. As far as I'm really not looking for new business myself. I've kept a dozen clients. I've had them for 47 years, 46 years, the ones I'm working with. But if somebody wanted to get in touch with me, go through my website. If you have a business question, I'm happy to answer it. If I can put somebody in the right direction, I'd be happy to. Because again, I specialize in publicizing and promoting products. But again, it's more than that. And if you have time, I'll tell you the best sales secret I was ever taught was by a fellow named Gene Megna. Gene told me when you're asking a question, you're asking for a close. It's better to say, Kevin, what do you think of the idea of purchasing this bottled water from me? As opposed to, Kevin, I'd like you to purchase this bottled water from me. Because if you put it in the abstract and it's an idea, it's less threatening to them. Yeah. And it really is a tremendous way of getting information. What do you think of the idea of purchasing this water from me? Can you see how it might help you?
All right. We are out of time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but it was really fun. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. Appreciate it very much.
You're quite welcome. And thanks everybody for listening and watching. This is a show about business challenges, business encouragement. If you've got concerns about the growth of your company, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn at Winning Business Radio. You can drop me a note, kevin@winningbusinessradio.com. Our company is Winning Incorporated. We're part of Sandler Training. We develop sales teams into high achievers and sales leaders into true coaches and mentors. We're not right for everybody, but maybe we should have a conversation. Thank you, as I say every week, to producer and engineer Juan. Thank you, Juan, for another job well done. Be sure to join us again next week, Monday, January 22nd. We'll do it all over again. Until then, this is Kevin Hallinan.
You've been listening to Winning Business Radio with your host, Kevin Hallinan. If you missed any part of this episode, the podcast is available on Talk4 Podcasting and iHeartRadio. For more information and questions, go to winningbusinessradio.com or check us out on social media. Tune in again next week and every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time to listen live to Winning Business Radio on W4CY Radio, W4CY.com. Until then, let's succeed where others have failed and win in business with Kevin Hallinan and Winning Business Radio.